Agile Coaching, which she co-authored with Liz. Rachel started her career as a software engineer, and after 30 years, she still enjoys the combination of creativity and problem solving that is involved in developing computer solutions. After 5 years coaching extreme programming product development teams at Unruly in London, she's now the lead engineer at Makers Academy, a company dedicated to helping people find jobs that they love in the software industry. Liz is a programmer and an Agile coach and has been for the last 25 years. She was raised here in Wellington, studied computer science at Victoria, and in 1998 got the travel bug and moved to London, where she started work on Y2K issues. Soon after arriving, she discovered Agile and has been rather a fan of it ever since. She met Rachel while they were both working as Agile coaches at the BBC, and over a swift pint at the Extreme Tuesday Club, they decided they'd collaborate and write a book together. Liz now uses her expertise in Agile and Lean to run her own software development company called Dyslexia Gold. This company which helps children with dyslexia learn to read and write. So please welcome Rachel and Liz.
Hello, everyone. We're really pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting us. The topic of our talk is carry on learning, and this is because we find that learning is very important to being agile and to producing great products and value. So we didn't know that we were going to have some introductions, but this picture, just because perhaps you think that Liz and I work together all the time, this picture was taken at an Agile conference in Chicago in 2009, which was when our book was published. And I think this is literally the last time that we presented together. And that's not because we don't get on, because we do, but it's because we have our separate interests, and we both enjoy and have very similar backgrounds.
And even though we both live in London, it was virtually easier to meet over here than meet in London.
Yeah. And there is one kind of quirky fact about us living we live apart, but our addresses are almost exactly the same, but in different towns. So, like,
we're neighbours. You would think we're neighbours. In fact, Pragmatic Press were really confused writing our cheques, because I live at 31 Lancaster Road and Rachel's at 30 Lancaster Road.
But in different towns. So Bruce gave a bit of an introduction into our background. So we're going to skip that, but we did want to mention Extreme Tuesday Club, because what brought us together initially was a love of extreme programming. We both have a software development background, and we both were frustrated by the pain that we'd seen pre-Agile.
Yeah, we worked in the 90s, unlike some of you here, and in the 90s we worked on programs for years that never released, never delivered value. I worked on programs that were designed from the beginning to never make any money or be released, which they were brochureware. The company needed it to have it in its brochure, but they knew nobody would ever buy it.
So XTC is Extreme Tuesday Club, and it's the meetup, and it's still an ongoing meetup, which started in 1999 in London and has been still going on Tuesdays in London, and we still go. We
meet at a pub and we discuss extreme stuff like extreme programming, you know, pair programming, test-driven development, all that extreme stuff.
Okay, but our talk today isn't about extreme programming, even though that is one of our pet topics. So you can ask us about that at any other time during the conference. We'll be around during the breaks and stuff. What we really want to talk to you about is learning. And we feel that learning is super important. We feel that learning is super important because learning is bringing everybody together to consider new ways of working, new ideas, and helping to apply those. And through that process, we create more value. We have more opportunity to create value, and we can find better ways of working. So we feel if you boil everything down in Agile, you come down to learning to deliver value. And the reason that I picked this photograph is because there's a very lucky factor. Everybody loves learning, and they like so if you create a workplace where people can learn, people become super motivated, and they enjoy working in that environment. So what we want to do is to talk to you a little bit about how you can create an environment where that can happen. Now, before we kind of launch too much into the rest of the material, I know lots of people have gone over to the audience, and we want to do the same thing. So, quick show of hands. Who here today heard about an idea that they really would like to try out with their team? Can you just raise your hands? Okay.
Brilliant.
All right. So now I want to ask you to turn to your neighbour and just take a moment, tell them what the idea is. What is it that you've taken away from today that you would like to apply? So give you we're not going to time you exactly because we haven't got a fabulous timer, so just go for it. Well, let's just let them have the hubble bubble. Or just give another. Could do this for 20 minutes.
Yeah. They're really engaged.
Yeah. I'm going to cut them out. All right. Yeah. Okay. I think I learned this at a coaching gathering, but when people raise their hand like that, and if you notice that happening, then everybody goes quiet and more people raise their hands. I don't know if that's I've seen people do that today, but I didn't know if you all knew about that kind of code. So I might do that again if we kind of refer back to you. So I'm going to ask you another question now, and this is a quick show of hands, but meaning a show of hands where we all raise our hands if we think. So here is an excited crowd, enthusiastic, full of energy, really supportive. Is this what your team is going to be like when you go back to explain the idea? Who thinks that they're going to have this level of support? All right, so well done on you. And it's if you go to a team that's already agile, you may well find that this is the case. But in a lot of organizations, this is not really going to be the case. And often, actually, you are not even ready to try out your new idea, and you need to invest a little bit of time in learning and thinking about what that is. So one of the things we've found, and I think you'll agree, is basically most teams have worries when it comes to trying new things, but they're often different worries, and each person has got a different worry. So you have people who are thinking, I don't know how to do that. You have, are we allowed to do that? What if it goes wrong? Sounds like hard work.
Also, people can be upset because they take it as a criticism. If you're proposing a new way, that implies there was something wrong with the old way, which they've invested their life into, so they can feel personally attacked, even though that was the last thing on your mind.
So what we really strongly advise is that you go carefully, go slowly, don't go all in with your new idea that you just heard at the conference, but instead, take an agile approach. Try to think, look at the situation at hand, try to think how you can break it down into small bits that people can try without overwhelming people, and be very sensitive to the pressures that people are already under. So,
Agile is not a recipe. You can't just follow the Agile book. Context matters. The context of your team, of your company, of the culture What would work here in Wellington would not work in New Delhi. So today we're going to tell you some stories about practices that didn't work as expected for us, experiments that went wrong. You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, and you can't learn without changing and without doing things differently.
So the first story is from Liz.
Right. A company I worked at recently in the UK, in London, is called giffgaff, which is a very modern, a cheap mobile phone network with a very quirky image. And working in there, they had a very quirky image as well, all bean bags and pool tables and hammocks and, you know, fake grass everywhere. And it is a very successful company, but they wanted a new approach for a new product, so they hired a whole new team. They hired me as the Agile coach, and they hired 6 really, really good, expensive developers, of which 3 were back-end developers who worked in Java, and 3 were front-end developers who worked in Angular. And of course, even though the whole team was new, including me, I wasn't involved in hiring. The people who hired that team didn't work in the team. But obviously we had a due date that we hadn't committed to. You know, we were already late. Day one, we were already late for a project we didn't know anything about. So I looked at these 3 back-end developers and 3 front-end developers, and I thought, well, that's not a very efficient use of resources. It would be much better if I could get them to work together and share knowledge. And, you know, I've got more front-end work coming up than back-end, and I want them to do pair programming, and 3 people's not a good number for pair programming. So I thought, well, this is a simple solution. I'll get 1 back-end, I'll make the pairs 1 back-end, 1 front-end. And then I've got 3 rotating pairs, and after a period of time, I'll have, you know, everybody will be able to pair with everyone else. Everyone will know the whole code base. We'll go faster. It won't matter if we have more back-end or front-end. However, I was a bit over-enthusiastic, and it didn't work. The team hadn't gelled yet. We were all really struggling with this new company culture. And the team had no respect for each other. I don't know, you know, Java developers and Angular developers are very different beasts. Trying to convince a Java developer that an Angular developer knows what they were doing didn't work. And although I was told, you know, everybody claimed they were Agile and they'd worked in Agile companies and they were all experts and they were all worth that high salary, none of them had actually paired before. So with hindsight, I was trying to use a very advanced technique far too early before the team had gelled. But I had backfired quite badly, and needless to say, the Java developers didn't pair with the Angular developers.
Okay, and so what we wanted to do was contrast the same practice but working in a different situation. So here's a front-end developer, a back-end developer, and a UX expert all working well, and not only just pairing, they're applying mob programming. So the context that made this possible is that when we hire people, we make it very clear that you have to do Java and you have to do JavaScript, and that you don't have to be an expert in both, but you have to be willing to work in both those languages. And that this company, a company where I was working called Unruly, they've been using extreme programming for about 12 years. Not when this photograph was taken a couple of years ago. And their situation is that they know that pairing is expected, and also mob programming makes sense if they need to share and get a wider view on a crucial design decision. And so when they're working, they normally will have discussed a story and agreed a design approach before even giving an estimate on that piece of work. And then when they are actually implementing that, they know that they need to get opinions from Mike, the UX expert, because otherwise they want to be able to put good polish on the already existing agreed design that they're trying to do. So they know that there's a level of finesse that they'll be putting on towards the end of developing a feature. We would normally be putting features live very frequently. So this is not planned in advance. Mike needs to be around so that he can serve the needs of the teams, and he needs to prioritize his time between 2 or 3 teams at any one point. But the big difference is this practice, pair programming and mob programming, is supported in the organization. And so it works because people they know it's expected, and they know how to do it, and it's been part of what they were hired to do. However, I'm going to now flip and tell a story that didn't work so well that I was leading from an Agile coaching point of view. So I won't name the investment bank because that would be unfair. But I was working in an investment bank, and I'd been hired to be an Agile coach, and I'd been hived off into like an area to write a document about how the teams were going to be Agile, and I wasn't allowed to coach any of the teams. And this made me a little bit sad. And so when a team did come and say, hey, Rachel, will you come and coach us? I went, of course. And I leapt at the chance. And they were saying, Scrum's not working for us. They were having some kind of classic symptoms that you might see with Scrum, where they'd get to the end of the sprint and the testing hadn't been finished, and then some of the bug fixing would happen in the next sprint. And they wanted to try and address this. So I suggested, because I'd just been on a training course with David Anderson, who was explaining about Kanban, I thought, right, this is my chance to try Kanban in a real situation. And what I found, this picture I've got here, what you'll see is that, and this is something I didn't really realize, in the middle, you'll see there's a middle lane and a lot of pink cards towards the end. Basically, everything was kind of blocked on being released. They weren't actually allowed to release software for several months. And so Kanban is all about creating a flow of value. And if you're in the situation where you're not allowed to release any software, it doesn't work very well. So what it did is it made everything very visible. It's like, oh, okay, so we're creating a lot of things. They go across the board. Then, oh, no, we're running out of room. And what I should have done is spent more time understanding their basic context. They were trying to support one existing release by bug fixing it at the same time as building a new release where they would have to apply exactly the same changes, but that neither of those were really releasable by them. And so and then they had lots of kind of limitations, like they had testers in Canada and also in Moscow, and then the testers in Moscow didn't even have a phone on their desk, let alone a webcam. And so that made it very, very hard for them to even see this board that was in London, which was a physical board of notes. So I guess I learned my lesson in that maybe some electronic tooling would have been a better idea. But I wanted to kind of hand over to Liz to tell a more positive story about applying Kanban.
When me and Rachel worked at the BBC, we were in different, BBC's massive, we've got lots of different teams, so we didn't work in the same team or anything. I was an Agile coach there on one of the many teams that made up the iPlayer. And this was a really exciting project. This was the very early days of streaming TV online. And, you know, it's the BBC. Everybody was so excited about iPlayer that it was going to be a world first. So our Kanban was a success in this environment. I had a very experienced team who had been at the BBC forever. They liked the BBC because it's sort of like university. They wandered around in bare feet and had coffee, and it just felt like being at university. It didn't feel like being at work. They were a very gelled team, and they were very motivated. They were very proud to work for the BBC, and they were very proud to be working on this massive iPlayer project, which was revolutionary. So Kanban just worked because they were gelled, experienced, and motivated.
Okay, so what we've tried to explain is, you know, two practices that worked and didn't work in different contexts. And now we're kind of going to talk a little bit more generally about how you can start to build a learning culture.
So Agile isn't their end goal. Nobody here should think that their purpose is to make their company Agile, because that's not right, the purpose is to make your company lots of money, or if you're a profit, if you work for a ministry of something, you've got a purpose, which isn't money, but you've got a purpose. But nobody's purpose is to make an agile company. This book here, Changing Software Development, Learning to Become Agile, talks a lot about this. This is by Alan Kelly, a guy I worked with at another company. So Agile, you should think of Agile as a stepping stone to systems thinking. If you don't know systems thinking, you should read up about all the lean stuff, the Toyota way. It's awesome. And systems thinking is a stepping stone to learning culture, creating a learning culture. So the point of Agile is to create a learning culture in your company, and the reason you want a learning culture in your company is because this gives you a massive competitive advantage. If your company comes up with new ideas quicker and refines your process quicker than your competitor, you can make more money. So for the rest of the talk, we're going to talk about some concrete techniques to help you to take back to build a learning culture at your company. So a book club is one of my favourites. It's an easy practice to start with, and it's very effective. And me and Alan Kelly, from the author of that other book, ran a great book club at Actix where we worked. So a book club, we did it in lunchtime. It's a nice relaxed lunch where you discuss books, but this isn't like your mum's chicklet book club where they go and discuss chicklet. Obviously you're discussing great books like our book or so either the company can provide food, which sends a very powerful message to the employees that the company values learning, or if you're on a tighter budget than that, people can bring their own lunch. So how we ran it is so people came to the book club, Alan advertised it, people came to the book club. We chose a book together, and then each week somebody was tasked to present a chapter to the people, and they'd like do a PowerPoint and would discuss whatever it was in the book. So you could read the whole book, or you could just come and listen to the PowerPoint of each chapter and get the major bits. There's no requirements you can choose any book you want. It could be a book about computer programming, it could be a book about Agile, but it could be a book about user interaction design, or a book about your domain. You know, you might be working in investments banks. It could be a book about options or telecoms or anything. It's just whatever the whole group feels that they'd like to learn at the moment. The only real criteria is the book needs to be something you discuss. It needs to be thought-provoking. You need to, have each chapter needs to be something that's going to provoke discussion and that people are going to, it's worthwhile to learn.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about another practice that you could implement where you work, hopefully, and maybe you already do. Can I just get a show of hands? Does anybody have lightning talks where they work on a regular basis? Yeah, so a few of you. And it's quite a common thing for people to try to do. The situation I'm going to describe is so I joined this XP company called Unruly, and they had 20% time. So they had time when they would go away and learn stuff, but they didn't have any time and they had also great conference allowance, you could go to conferences, but they had no feedback mechanism so that people would hear what you learned about or hear what conference you went to. And so I created a slot in the calendar, marked it off so that we always had a room every 2 weeks to talk about the things that we'd learned. Because this is the starting point of having a learning culture, is that you share what you've learned, and that I also agreed with my manager that we would do this in work time, so that it wasn't something where people had to use their lunch hour, because sometimes people want to have a break, get out of the office, and if it feels like every lunch hour is also used for something else, so I can't really get out of the building, then that didn't feel fair. So I was lucky in that I had a supportive manager, and he said, yep, definitely. So 2 o'clock every other Thursday we could do this. And here's Tim, and he's giving a talk about one of the things he'd been learning about on one of his 20% days. And you can see it's JavaScript because there's like a big thing of brackets coming in there. And he loves JavaScript. Now, as an Agile coach, I didn't want to be the person who had to organize this every 2 weeks because I felt that it would then fail. I knew I wanted to go on holiday, knew I wanted to be away, and I didn't want to be the person who has to go and nag everybody. You don't want to be the Agile nag. You want to be the person who is enabling people by them owning their own learning. And so we developed a checklist. What do you need to do to curate? We used a fancy word, curate the talks. And then we would always pick a new curator. And we had a little bit of a rule about how the new curator was picked. But if you were a curator who didn't get round to doing it, you would never lose that responsibility. You had to do it well for another curator to be picked. So it encouraged people to organize the lightning talks well. And so, Liz, you were going to talk about coding dojos.
Another practice I really love is coding dojos. I love them because I'm a programmer, and that means I love to program. I get a buzz from programming. So coding dojos are brilliant. They're about practicing coding. Musicians spend hours and their whole life practicing scales and very little time performing in front of people. And dojo comes from the martial arts. A dojo is where karate is the room where karate is done. And again, in martial arts like karate, you spend forever practicing your moves and very little time in a competition performing your moves. But us programmers spend all our time performing. We're always writing production code, and we spend very little time practicing. Once you've left university, you spend very little time practicing coding. So a coding dojo is a safe place to practice coding, to improve coding, to think of it like learning your scales. It's just about getting the fundamentals right and just safe practice. So how we organised it is it's a regular slot. I can't remember if it was lunchtime or during work time. It was probably lunchtime because I like lunchtime clubs. Once again, I think we got work to provide the lunch, which may be a bit of a bribe to get people along. And you can learn anything. Typically, it depends on the level of the developers you've got and the diversity of languages and skills and experience. So you could learn test-driven development, you could learn refactoring, or you could learn another language. So what you do is, I used cyberdojo.org, which is an online tool so that everybody is on the same tool. You choose a very simple problem to solve, something like the Fibonacci sequence or the Buzz-Fizz game, and you do it. We get them in pairs, so to practice pair programming, and they have to do TDD, test-driven development. And there's various ways of doing it. This book by Emily Bash called The Coding Dojo Handbook gives you lots of ideas. But the way we used to do it is everybody would have a bit of time to write, and then somebody would show the first test they'd written, and we could discuss the pros and cons of that test, and then we'd have some more time, and somebody would talk about the second test. And that was with quite trying to get everyone to understand test-driven development, and it took a while, but there's no better way than doing it hands-on in practice. We paired, senior and junior people together. But Rachel's used it very successfully with a much more experienced team where they used to just learn a whole new language for the sake of it. So you can do it any way you want.
So just to add, so we did coding dojos. Again, we did them in work time, not at lunchtime, so we don't agree on everything. We used it because our environment, everybody was familiar with pair programming and test-driven development because they were doing that like morning and not afternoon, and that was their bread and butter. But what we wanted to do was learn new techniques like functional programming. So Java 8 was on the horizon, and we were keen to try out some of the functional concepts, but we didn't want to just try that out on the live code base without actually being any good at it. And that was one of the reasons. And then I don't know if anyone's heard of the JavaScript framework React. Has anybody heard of that? Super popular and red hot right now with developers, but actually a lot of people don't know how to do it very well. And so we had a series which was advertised as React Dojo, but then the person who was organizing it made everyone learn CSS first, and then about JavaScript bundling, and eventually they got onto the actual React stuff. But often people need to learn skills that they would rather skip or pass over because they assume somebody else on their team will do that boring work. And it's really a good way for people to get together and plow through some of the techniques that they needed to know when they already knew test-driven development and refactoring and those kinds of things. So this is the last but very practical technique that you can try out. And this is swapping around, but I'm going to talk a little bit about different kinds of swapping around. So the first kind of swapping around is switching people between teams. And this was a practice that we used to do on a regular basis. Every 3 months, we'd send around a Google survey. We'd say, does anyone like to switch to another team? If so, do you have a preference which team? And also, how soon would you like to do it? And some people would always fill it in saying, I would like to move to the other team next year. And then next year, I would like to move to the other team next year. So some people never moved, but there were other people who did move, and they actually worked in all of the teams. And they would, every time the survey came around, they'd fill it in, and then it was reviewed by the team leads. So it would obviously be total chaos if everybody changed places. So we didn't want to have that. We wanted to make some logical and sensible swaps. We did, however, find that there were some swaps that team leads weren't keen on doing. You know, my best Java 8 developer wants to go and join the JavaScript team. No, I don't want that to happen. Maybe somebody else, maybe this one who's struggling, they can go. So there are a couple of books. There's Creating Great Teams and Dynamic Reteaming. These are actually full of techniques around how you can organize people to select different teams for themselves rather than that be organized by management. The other kinds of swapping around is more radical. And when I explained it to Liz, she didn't believe that we'd actually tried it. So this is swapping organizations. So genuinely, in London, there are enough tech companies that you can do a 1-week swap with another company.
In Wellington, you mean, not in London.
No, I mean in London.
Yeah, but also here.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about what's happened. So this may already have happened in Wellington, but in London, there are enough companies around that you can arrange for somebody to go and work at another company for a week, and then for them to send somebody back to work with your company for a week. Now, you think that wouldn't be possible, and there are certainly things you need to consider. You wouldn't do it with your direct competitor, for example. We would get our one CTO to meet the other CTO, and they would sign an NDA to make sure that no secrets got leaked of anything that was very, very important. And we weren't in a situation where we needed to deal with security clearance or that kind of thing. So you have to, it may not work in all situations, but we found it was a very effective way for somebody to come and work with us, and then the key responsibility of the person who's coming in on an exchange is at the end of the week, they give feedback of their observations on the team that played host to them. And then we would do the same again. So somebody from our organization would go and work with another company like Redgate or Tim Group, and they would then, at the end of their week there, they would give feedback to those people to say, this is what I noticed happening in your organization, and here are some things that I think you could improve on. So it was a way of helping us to open our eyes to different ways we could work, because we were very confident, we were doing really well, and actually we weren't that great at continuous integration, and a lot of our practices could be improved. And it helped to do these exchanges for us to learn where our weak areas were and get some ideas by going to the other companies of what environment and what tools they were using and what we might be able to benefit from. So this is it does take a little bit of organization, but it's surprising how many companies are in a position that they would be able to do this, and it doesn't cost a lot. So it's not like an expensive training course or going to a conference, that kind of thing. So we now want to go out from the detail and to the more general level. So we want to talk about getting the conditions for creating a learning culture right. because we want to help you succeed when you go back from this conference with your idea and you want to try and implement it. So step one, I showed you that picture with the people with all of the worries. Put yourself in their shoes. Think about the context. We told you some stories about things that we tried that didn't work, and that's because we didn't think through carefully whether what we were asking made sense. And so be aware of the people who you're working with and try to empathize with their situation and talk to them about their worries. It can really help if you put some investment at the beginning to make it easy to start. So for example, I didn't want to organize the lightning talks, but I was happy to create the checklist of how somebody might organize one and book the room. It helps with the initial coding dojos or the book club to pick the first book, or get the tool and say, everybody, you need to use this tool, and this is the problem we're going to. So make it easy so people don't have something that puts them off. You know, if you make something so hard, then people are not going to want to try it. We talked about collaborative things, so it's important. For instance, when you talked about the book club, different people prepared a chapter. Try to make sure that you're involving everybody and that it's something that they can lead and they can shine at. You don't need to be the star. You don't need to be the organizer of everything. What you want is for the people in the team to have the opportunity to learn. And so think about ways that different people can lead it and different people can make it happen. You may have skeptics, okay? You have some people who are like, really? Oh my God, I can't believe you're even trying this. And the thing is, actually, sometimes we could all benefit from having a little skeptic on our shoulder to say, did you really think this through? We've got a massive deadline next week. This is not a good time. So do listen to skeptics. They are your friends. Often the people we've found through coaching engagements, those people who were always moaning and saying this Agile's never going to work, you meet them 6 months later and they're in the middle of leading an Agile transformation somewhere else because it just took them a little time to get their head around the idea. They are engaging with you. They are trying to think about what you want to happen.
They care enough to protest. The people who just go along with what you say and don't protest often have a very low level engagement. They just don't really care. They're at bums on seat kind of a job. The people who care enough to challenge you, actually have much more engagement in the company and in the process and the product. Yeah.
So we would say they are your friends. Talk to them, even if they are also argumentative friends. Okay. And then make it relevant. So think about what learning is appropriate here. So Liz was talking about being in environments where people wanted to learn TDD. I've been in environments where we needed people to learn about CSS. You have to consult with the people that are in your team to try and figure out what would be a useful thing to learn. And you can create a list of questions. You could run a meeting with Post-it notes, you know how we like sticky notes, and you can get a lot of people saying, I want to learn about this, I want to learn about that. Then you just have to turn it into a backlog. And it's like, what are we going to try and learn first? Let's not try and learn everything. And perhaps pick something that you feel is achievable and could be led by somebody who's there and is interested to lead it. And then lastly, I would say it's very important for you to figure out a time when this can happen. You've got to be sensitive to the kind of organization you're in. So Liz, you've been in situations where it's felt like, no, we have to do this at lunchtime. I've been in situations where I've felt like if I organized a lunchtime thing, people were going, no, we're not going. So you have to try and figure out times when things are going to happen. And all of these things, if you can create some sort of rhythm or cadence around it, so it's something when people, I know that happens every Friday at 2 o'clock, or I know that we do that every Monday evening, it helps people to get a sense of it's something that's continuing on. And then once it's kind of routine, and people will make sure it happens. So think about how you factor it into the work day, and try to indicate some kind of, to show if you can get it being part of the workday support from management, it signals to them that the management team really care about learning happening in that organization and they support learning as an activity. So I couldn't create a slide deck without having a picture with silly hats on because, of course, that's a crucial practice in Agile. No, it isn't, but it is important to celebrate. And so one of the things we used to do when new people started in our team was that they, however senior they were, they would go through an Agile Academy program. This would be organized by the last bunch of new people. And so there were some sessions. So I'm presenting Tom with a certificate. It's a specially designed certificate with lots of cute things on and it's in a glass frame that he can keep. And then these would be around the place. So it's a token that we care about learning and we care about the learning that you have done. And in order to help embed practices within an organization, it can be helpful to create rituals and tokens and things that make it part of your workspace. And so it might seem like a silly thing to shake somebody's hand and give them a certificate, but actually people appreciate the care that's gone into designing a certificate with their name on, getting a frame for it, and making time to say thank you. We appreciate the time that you put in to learn things. In the background, there's like a column. I don't know if you can see it, but it's got stickers all over it. So one of the things we wanted to do was to kind of celebrate that people have been to conferences. So we created this as like a totem pole with like stickers from all the things we've been to. And again, it's something to it's a very trivial thing, but it's also a way to kind of radiate, we value you doing this, and we want to celebrate it. So think about how you could, small ways you can celebrate what learning is actually happening. So we're kind of coming towards the end of our presentation now, and I want to go back to you talking in your pairs again. So we both would like you to take something valuable back from Agile New Zealand as a conference, and you talked initially at the beginning of something that you were interested to perhaps introduce in your teams. What we'd like you to think about now is what will you do to invest some time in that idea? What will you practically do so that you can then make that happen in the context of your team, bearing in mind some of the stories that we've shared with you?
What are the first steps you would need to do? What's a concrete first step you could take? All
right, so we're going to again ask you to talk for, I think this time 2 minutes. Now we have the timer working so we can actually tell what 2 minutes is. So here's some suggestions, but please do talk and talk about what you'd like to do when you go back from Agile New Zealand. Now we can actually... But it's fine. It's really perfect.
We don't have to go all the way to zero. That would be quite late.
No, it's fine. She only set it to go like about halfway through, so, and it wasn't the right time then. Then I think what we could do is ask for a couple of people to share what they were going to do, and then say, right, thank you.
And draw it out into something concrete if they say something woolly.
Yeah.
Coach them.
So I'll wait till it goes down to 7, and then we'll... So if we leave it too long, people will just go off. I'm feeling alone now.
Okay.
Okay. That was a great buzz. Sounds like you've got some good ideas there. I'm going to ask if anyone would be brave enough to share what's one step they want to do. Any takers? Would you like to say what you're going to do? Somebody at the back there. A chapter at a time. Book club. Great. And anybody else? Somebody that, yes?
We have guilds at our work where, someone will do like a front end talk about something, but we're just talking before, why not take that the next step further and use it as we can still have those where you talk about a session, but why don't we run a dojo instead, where afterwards you can actually practice what you just learned.
Great. Okay, so giving a talk and then a practice, followed by practice. Okay, all right. And then I know that there were a lot of things discussed and we can't go through all of them. So we've come to the end of what we were planning to talk to you about. We've got time for questions, but thank you very much for listening. Okay, so question, Clark.
Just a suggestion, if you're struggling to get people to give you work time, 1 hour for every 2 weeks is just over 1%. Very, very small investment. I've pitched that in the past, and 1% sounds a lot less than 1 hour.
Yeah. Yeah. Will you be willing to give 1% of your time to learning? Yes.
Thanks, Clark.
Any other questions? Yes, at the back.
So I just wanted to add the same from the gentleman before. I actually used to run guilds back in Australia, and we had that argument of you please release 1 to 2 hours at a time every Thursday, educators. Once I actually pitched them, well, what if we delivered a feature that the whole organisation can use in one of our repositories? Then we proved the point that we can actually give real value back to the organisation. So we built together a, long story short, feature spin up, like you commit in a branch to Cloud Foundry, and that would spin up its own environment for quick testing. So we built that as an automated feature, and ever since then, no one complained about the guild after that. So everyone started using that code in all their projects. So you give back that organisation-wide thing, and then no one complains ever again.
Yeah, it's all about creating value. And yeah, awesome. Any other questions? Yes? No, that's somebody just adjusting their sunglasses. All right, yes?
There was a great talk this morning about diversity in teams and managing the challenges of diversity in teams. How do you make sure you keep those kind of cultures working and support for those people who may have different attitudes in those dynamic changing teams?
So we missed that talk, so I can't comment on the actual specific talk. I think our point about listening to people and understanding their concerns and taking forward something that people can join in optionally, but trying to make it easy to join in. So if you're aware that people have particular challenges, taking the time to make the material more accessible, that people can prepare in advance and feel supported, can be key to kind of introducing a new approach. And I think what you don't want to do is to make people feel out of their depth, because then they will kind of react negatively. And then if you have an initiative where only 1 or 2 people go and the majority of the people don't go, it's much harder to keep a flame and keep going. So I know it's the end of the day, and so it doesn't matter if you don't have any more questions. We're happy to wrap up there. Thank you very much for having us. Oh, Clark, have you got it?
Have you learned anything today?
Yes, I have. I went to the talk around security and using stories around security, and that was pretty interesting. So I'd encourage you to talk to, I think Andrew Hood was the presenter. So. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Just a couple of quick ones at the end. So don't forget, use the Show Gizmo app to rate each of the sessions, please. That's it for today. Hope you've had an interesting day, that you've been challenged in some of your thinking, and that perhaps you've met some interesting people. Please be ready to go. If you can be back at 8:45 tomorrow, we've got a 9 o'clock kickoff, and we're leading off with the next keynote, which is Mike Orzen talking on connecting the dots, Agile, DevOps, and Lean IT.